Welcome to Unit 3, The Long Arc of History. And today, we're going to meet Edward Bernays, the visionary. He's known as the Godfather of Public Relations, but I call him the Godfather of all the other Godfathers. As you remember, Le Bon was the philosopher sociologist, Creel the practitioner, Lippmann the journalist, and now we'll continue with Eddie Bernays, who more than any of the other men understood and brought to fruition the tremendous power latent in the new technology. First, a little background. Imagine his father sent him to Cornell to get a degree in agriculture. Anyways, that was kind of a disaster for him stuck in Ithaca, New York. He returned to the city. He became a promoter, press agent on Broadway, where he began to tinker with ideas about shaping the public's attitudes towards arts and entertainment. He was clever, creative, and industrious. And by the time the First World War came along, he was eager to join the Committee on Public Information and try his hand at propaganda on a grander scale. As a member of the Foreign Press Bureau, he continually impressed his superiors with his instinct for shaping opinion despite his youth. He was selected to be one of the delegates to Europe for the peace talks in Paris. However, like Lippmann, he was mostly sidelined with little responsibility and poor access to the real action. In the end, he was glad to return home, but satisfied with his contribution to the war effort. Years later, Bernays reflected on some of the important insights he gained during the war years. He tells a particular story regarding the French premier, who upon trying to enter the Paris gates at night was unrecognized by the guards. Without identification papers, he realized he had a little chance of entering. He told the guards he was de Lesseps, the owner of Le Matin, the great French newspaper, and he was permitted to pass without question. Bernays realized that the power structure is not always what it appears to the average man. At a different point during the war, a British practitioner of propaganda noted that they were having problems recruiting volunteers, especially as they had been forced to report heavy casualties at the evacuation hospitals. A suggestion was made to change the name from evacuation hospitals to evacuation stations because more casualties were expected from a mere station than a hospital. After implementation, the number of volunteer recruits again began to rise. Years later, Bernays commented, "Now this kind of word manipulation is practically worldwide, but the idea struck me with powerful impact at the time." Finally, Bernays recognized that the CPI, Committee on Public Information, was the forerunner of modern psychological warfare. Let that sink in. It built Allied morale in the United States, undermined enemy morale, and won over the neutrals. Following the war, Bernays realized what could be done for a nation at war could be done for organizations and people in a nation at peace. He eventually founded an entirely new peacetime industry, public relations, and his new employers, corporate America, welcomed him with open arms. One of his most famous campaigns was called Torches of Freedom. Philip Morris secured his talents in an attempt to open the market for cigarettes to women, whom smoking was considered taboo. In 1929, during the Easter Day Parade in New York City, Bernays conscripted a group of debutantes, including his own secretary, to march in the parade, and at a designated point where newspaper men were sure to capture the action, the debutantes grabbed the cigarettes they had stowed and lit up torches of freedom, a statement proclaiming their emancipation from ignorant taboos and their equality with men. As we know, the overall campaign was a resounding success. At least from Philip Morris's standpoint, Bernays was richly rewarded for his part as well. Indeed, propaganda techniques could be used in peacetime. Torches of Freedom is a classic example of one of Bernays' trademark techniques, what he called stagecraft, where an event perceived as newsworthy is manufactured to influence the public. In fact, this principle was so important to Bernays that he made it the centerpiece of his propaganda definition. He states, "Modern propaganda is a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relations of the public to an enterprise, idea, or group. This practice of creating circumstances and of creating pictures in the minds of millions of persons is very common. Virtually no important undertaking is now carried on without it, whether the enterprise be building a cathedral, endowing a university, marketing a moving picture, floating a large bond issue, or electing a president." This cozy relationship between the news and propaganda experts has flourished since 1928. Camouflaging propaganda in the finery and objectivity of the news is seductive and dishonest at best. Here was fake news before fake news was a thing. Finally, let's take a close look at Bernays' playbook, The Engineering of Consent. Written in 1947 to see how this all fits together into a marketing campaign. Incidentally, consent means to give your permission, and I don't think that's what Bernays actually means here. I'll let you decide. Here's the introduction to the engineering of consent. Freedom of speech and its democratic corollary of free press have tacitly expanded our Bill of Rights to include the right of persuasion. So that's freedom of speech and its democratic corollary, free press. So free speech, free press. Tacitly expanded our Bill of Rights to include the right of persuasion. This development was an inevitable result of the expansion of the media of free speech and persuasion. Now wait a minute here, because the potential to persuade has existed forever as a function of language. What Bernays is really talking about is persuasion on steroids. It's quite a bit different. So let's go on. All these media provide open doors to the public mind. In other words, you become a blank slate to be written on. And then it says, any one of us, through these media, may influence the attitudes and actions of our fellow citizens. Wait a minute, that's not true at all. Very few people had access to the large media. And the tremendous expansion of communication in the United States has given this nation the world's most penetrating and effective apparatus for the transmission of ideas. Now that is very, very true. Words hammer continually at the eyes and ears of America. The United States has become a small room in which a single whisper is magnified thousands of times. Knowledge of how to use this enormous amplifying system becomes a matter of primary concern to those who are interested in socially constructive action. The megaphone. Who can compete against a megaphone? Isn't this really an idea monopoly? Think about it. A rigged game for whoever controls the press and the media? Later, Bernays emphasized that creating news helped to vividly dramatize ideas for those who did not witness the events, and that the establishment of themes comparable to what in fiction is called the storyline or the narrative was essential. Right? Can you see how this begins to be stagecraft or theater? First, you create the event to dramatize your idea. Then you establish the storyline narrative selected to resonate with your target audience. This then is amplified over the news and other media outlets with the big megaphone. Okay, then it can be additionally amplified with authorities. And finally, events can be set up in a chain reaction to follow the expansion of a preferred storyline. All this would be designed to determine an end goal. Here was the manipulation and monopolization of ideas and attitudes fully realized. This was Bernays' signature idea. And if ideas are truly revolutionary, then the revolution had begun. But the average citizen had no idea a battle was starting. Bernays was first and foremost a visionary. He stated, "Intelligent men must realize that propaganda is a modern instrument by which they can fight for productive ends and help bring order out of chaos." He echoes Laban, who understood that the old foundational ideas were crumbling and breaking up. Chaos was likely to ensue without a new form of control. Enter stagecraft and the manipulation of ideas. Undercover propaganda in a democracy. After all, who doesn't like a good story? In conclusion, let's take a minute to summarize this long arc of history section. Let's give Harold Laswell, our new friend and political professor from the University of Chicago, who I mentioned in a previous video, we'll give him the last word. In 1927, Laswell wrote, "Propaganda is a concession to the willfulness of the age. The bonds of personal loyalty and affection which bound a man to his chief have long since dissolved. Monarchy and class privilege have gone the way of all flesh, and the idolatry of the individual passes for the official religion of democracy. It is an atomized world, in which individual whims have wider play than ever before, and it requires more strenuous exertions to coordinate and unify than formerly. The new antidote to willfulness is propaganda. If the masses will be free of chains of iron, it must accept its chains of silver. If it will not love, honor, and obey, it must not expect to escape seduction. Propaganda is a reflex to the immensity, the rationality, and the willfulness of the modern world. It is a new dynamic of society, for power is subdivided and diffused, and the more can be won by illusion than coercion. It has all the prestige of the new and provokes all the animosity of the baffled. To illuminate the mechanisms of propaganda is to reveal the secret springs of social action, and to expose to the most searching criticism our prevailing dogmas of sovereignty, of democracy, of honesty, and of the sanctity of individual opinion. The study of propaganda will bring into the open much that is obscure, until indeed it may no longer be possible for an Anatole France, poet and social critic during Laswell's time, to observe with truth that democracy, and indeed all society, is run by an unseen engineer. That concludes the long arc of history. We'll see you in the next video.